If we've not met, my name is Brady, and I'm an imperfect follower of Jesus. And if you're new here, this is a community of people who are imperfect and just trying to follow Jesus. A bunch of people who are hopefully daily trying to reorient our lives or refocus our attention on Jesus. Because all of us, we get distracted. Now, I want to know, as you followed Jesus this week, did anybody follow Jesus by watching the Olympics? Anybody waste their time watching the Olympics? Yeah? You guys? Okay. Now, the Olympics is incredible. I love a few things about the Olympics. One of the things I love about the Olympics is I will prioritize and I will make time to watch sports that I would never, ever, ever watch in a million years if it wasn't the Olympics. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, how often do you set aside time to watch people swim back and forth in the pool? Like, you never do that. Nobody does that. And yet, man, Olympic swimming, I am glued in. I am all about it. I mean, they're swimming. By the way, I have no idea how far they're swimming because it's in meters. Like, it's like they could be swimming miles or feet. Who knows? Like, they're just trying to trick you. Katie Ledecky, 1,500 meters. That sounds like a lot of, who knows? But it's impressive, and I will watch it. It doesn't matter. Butterfly, freestyle, backstroke, I'm in. Gymnastics, those people are super impressive, and I will never watch them unless it's the Olympics. I mean, the things that they can do in the air, the number of times they can spin and flip and then know where they're at and land, it blows my mind. And then at the Olympics, you got the fun sports. So this year they included 3-on-3 basketball. You play by ones and twos, it's half court. This is pickup ball. Pickup ball is now an Olympic sport. It'd be like if you had two-hand touch football. That's kind of the level that we're at here with this sport, 3-on-3 basketball. I mean, it's great. You guys, Winter Olympics, you guys watch the biathlon? To me, this is the James Bond event, because the only time that you would ever ski and shoot a rifle is if you're a spy, right? I mean, this is Inception. This is James Bond. Like, why they thought this was good? I mean, maybe they watched one of those early James Bond. They're like, we got to do this. This is the event that we need to do. I think about the pentathlon. So the modern pentathlon is 5 events, because, you got the prefix pent. 5 events, and you start by fencing. So you start by sword fighting, so you know this is going to be good, right? Then you swim, and then you ride horses, because those things go together really well. Then you run a race, and the last thing that you do, I kid you not, is you shoot a laser pistol. Yeah, the reigning world champion is Captain Kirk. What in the world? What's going on? But the Olympics, we love it and we will watch it. I mean, all of it. I'm so into it. Now, something big happened at the Olympics. Now, in order to understand how big this is, you have to understand that all of these sports, most of these sports, this is the pinnacle of their career. Like, most of these people have been working their entire lives, honing their athletic ability, honing their skills, working day and night, hours upon hours upon hours to achieve this level of success. Because for many of these sports, the Olympics is the Olympics for them, right? It's like the Super Bowl for football or the World Cup for football. It's like the Olympics is the thing. It's the most important thing they will ever participate in regards to their career in this sport. Now, I don't know if you've been following it, but Simone Biles, right? One of the greatest gymnasts of all times. In fact, they call her the GOAT, which I think is offensive, but no, I mean, she's all into that, I guess. I don't know. I feel like I'd get slapped for that, calling a girl a GOAT. Don't do that. But it stands for greatest of all time, okay? So, greatest gymnast of all time, arguably one of the greatest athletes of all time. It's incredible what she can do. Like, there are things being named after her because she's so good. And what she chose to do, because of all that's going on in her heart and her mind, is to step back and not participate in likely the most important event of her career, of her life so far. Because mentally, she's struggling. Now, I can tell that for a gymnast of her caliber, if she's not all there, that could be dangerous. Now, for me, I mean, if I'm doing a cartwheel and I fall, I'm going to be all right. I mean, as I get older, maybe not, but you know what I'm talking about. I mean, when you're going at the speed and there's that intensity and that velocity, you get hurt. And it seems like, I mean, possibly other people have done this before, I don't know. But as far as I'm aware, this is an unprecedented thing to step back from competing in the Olympics for your country, for your mental health. Even thinking about mental health in these terms, it's pretty new. I mean, growing up, you know, the coaches that I had, like their advice if you were struggling was suck it up. It didn't matter what you were dealing with. They had one piece of advice. It was suck it up. You just get out there and do it. Like, you're fine. Dust it off. I'm bleeding. You're fine. My bone's sticking out. Suck it up. Like that's kind of what they would do. It's really important that our world has moved on this because mental health matters. And I think what she's going through, and now she's going through things to a greater extent than many of us will ever go through. There's a lot going on. But I think it's a good example of what's going on in our culture as a whole. I mean, you think about just the normal levels of stress and anxiety that we experience just in life with the normal things that we go through, with the bills that we have to pay, the jobs that we have, our families, our relationships. And then you put on top of that what we've done in the last year and a half throughout COVID. You talk about the fear, talk about the anxiety, talk about the up and down economy, talk about the loss that people have experienced, the social isolation that people experience. Think about the polarization of our country, the anger and stuff that's going on in social media. And we're experiencing a lot. I know people throw around the word trauma a lot these days, but I think there's some level of trauma that we have experienced as a society. And it's important that we take a look at that because what happens if you don't deal with the trauma that you're experiencing, it will come back and it will haunt you, right? You've probably heard things like father wounds, mother wounds. Like as you grow up, things that happen in your childhood, they come back in adulthood if you just cope, if you just distract, if you just escape, if you just numb, if you don't do the work of healing, it comes back. And I think it's so important that we do this. And in Scripture, you'll see that God thinks that we should deal with our pain, with our difficulties, with the stuff that we're going through, with the stress, with the anxiety. In fact, what we see in Scripture, it's actually a little bit shocking the way that God deals with it, because it's not like the church typically deals with things. I like to call it drive-by Christianity. What we like to do is we like to just kind of like throw a verse out the window and just kind of drive by. Like, you know, it's going to be okay, you know, God's in control, and just kind of just move on. Because it's hard to sit with people in pain and difficulty and frustration. And God gives us an example and calls us to do this. I want to look at an example in the book of 1 Kings. In the book of 1 Kings, we've got a guy named Ahab. Now, just a little bit of background. The nation of Israel, this is God's people, right? He pulled them out of Egypt, saved them miraculously, brought them to the promised land. They had these judges and they had these kings. And what happened, it was a tragic thing, is they split. They had a civil war and they split into a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. And in the northern kingdom, what you find is that every single king they had sinned against God. They led the people to rebel against God in some manner, to some level. And we arrive at Ahab. And Ahab is the son of this guy who was, when he was king, the worst king they had ever had. But then Ahab takes it to a new level. Here's what we find. In 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 31, it says, "And if it had been a light thing for him," this is Ahab, "to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the first king of Israel, the northern kingdom, if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam," it's like as if it was not even a big deal. As if that was like the smallest thing he did was to lead the people in rebellion against God in the way that Jeroboam did. It says, he took for his wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, the king of the Sidonians. Now, kings in Israel were not supposed to marry people from other countries because God said, what's going to happen? You're going to marry them, and then they're going to try and worship the gods that they worship, and your heart's going to be pulled astray. And he said, don't do that. That's what he did. And he went and he married her, and then it says, and he went and he served Baal and worshiped him. So now he's not just married to Jezebel, he now is worshiping this false god Baal himself. It says he erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. So now the capital city of the northern kingdom of Israel, the people of Yahweh, the one true God of the world, now have a temple built in their capital city in worship of Baal, this false god. Like, that's the level of what's going on in Israel right now. It says, and Ahab made an Asherah. This is another type of worship that's really kind of gross. And Ahab did more to provoke the Lord God of Israel to anger him than all the kings of Israel who were before him. So think about all the different kings and the level of ways that they caused God anger and frustration because they led his people astray. It says he was the worst of the worst. He was the worst king in the history of Israel up to that time. Now, when we read this, this should break our hearts. This is the people of God. We call ourselves the people of God, right? We're his church. This was God's people that he saved, that he cared for. They were the people that were the descendants of Abraham, and God said, hey, I'm going to bless you so that you will now be a blessing to the world. Israel's calling was not just to be God's people where God would dwell among them, but also now to be a blessing and spread his goodness, his grace, his love out to the world. They were to be a blessing to the nations, and now they had become just as wicked as every other nation because of the terrible leadership of this king. And you imagine all the people that were hurt by this. This is a dark day in Israel's history. So God calls Elijah, the prophet Elijah. Probably many of you have heard about Elijah. You think about the chariot of fire, and that's later on. So we're going to rewind towards the beginning of his ministry. God calls him to be the prophet of Israel. And the first thing he does is he says, Elijah, I want you to start a drought in Israel. Hopefully this will turn the hearts of the people back to me. So Elijah announces there's going to be a drought. Like, I'm going to tell it to stop raining, and it won't rain until I tell it to start raining again. And that's exactly what happened. Now, droughts are awful, right? Can I get an amen, farmers? Droughts, no good. Now, in our day and age, we can weather through some amount of drought just because of, what we've got already going on. Where they lived, droughts were even more severe, even more devastating. And they lived in a very arid climate, a very desert-like climate. And you can't survive when a drought happens. And so obviously Elijah is not the most popular guy around. Right? Ahab wants to kill Elijah. So God tells Elijah to cross over the Jordan, go to the east side of the Jordan, and hide out by this brook. He's like in the WITSEC, he's in the Witness Protection Program. And he's hiding out in this little stream. That's where he gets to drink. And you know how he eats? God sends ravens every day to bring him food. It's like DoorDash. Like Elijah's got his own DoorDash going on. These ravens are just bringing him food every single day. He didn't have to do anything. Just hanging out by the brook, drinking the water, fresh water. It's not polluted, right? There's none of that pollution. And then he's getting food by ravens, miraculously, every day. Then the brook dries up. And so he goes over to a different country. He goes over to a different non-extradition country, obviously, because he doesn't want to be taken by Ahab. And God says, here's the deal. I'm going to show you this widow, and she's going to feed you every day. It's like, okay. So he walks up to this widow. It's like, hey, can I get a drink? She's like, sure. And he says, oh, by the way, can I get some food? And she says, actually, I only have enough food for me and my son, one more meal. I was about to make it, and then we were just going to basically starve to death. And he said, here's the deal. Go make that meal for you and your son. Just give me some food first, and then God's going to take care of you. And she believes him. She believes him. And then what happens every single day, they wake up and the jar of flour that she had that had been empty the day before had enough for them to eat. And the oil that was gone that they used the day before for the food, it was enough to make bread with. Every single day, God supernaturally fed them. Well, over time, her son gets sick and he dies. And what Elijah does is he goes into his room and he raises the kid from the dead. He's dead, no pulse. And Elijah raises him from the dead. Like, can you imagine what kind of prophet this was? Can you see what's going on in his life? Just the supernatural power of God through him. Well, then he goes back to Israel. He goes back to Israel and he confronts Ahab. He says, here's the deal, Ahab. We're going to have a contest between me and then the prophets of Baal. So we're going to go up to this mountain. And here's what we're going to do. We have all the people of Israel come around. I want you to get all the prophets of Baal. There were about 400 of them. And here's the deal. Here's what you do. Here's how the contest is going to go. We're both going to build an altar. After we build this altar, we're going to put a sacrifice on the altar. And then we are both going to call down to our gods. I'll call down to Yahweh, the one true God, and you guys call out to Baal. And whoever God can send fire and consume the offering, that's the one true God, and we will all follow him. And they're like, yeah, cool, we'll do that. So all these prophets of Baal, they build this altar. They start marching around it. They're like singing, they're chanting, they're calling out to him. They start cutting themselves with knives to try and get his attention and consume this sacrifice with fire. And nothing happens. And nothing happens. And then you see Elijah, like he's living his best life because he starts taunting them. He's making fun of them. Like really, he's taunting them. He's like, hey, maybe your God's too busy. Maybe he's taking a nap. Maybe he's going to the bathroom. You need to call out louder. Get him to come. Get him to pay attention to you and call down fire. And time goes by. Nothing happens. So finally, Elijah's like, okay, enough is enough. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to set up 12 stones representing each of the tribes of Israel. And then I'm going to build this trench around the altar. This deep trench, right? I'm going to put the sacrifice on it. Now, here's what I want you to do. I want you to douse it. I want you to drench it in water. Now, I don't know how much you know about fire, but fire and water, they don't mix, right? They don't do well together. And so he just bucket after bucket after bucket just drenches the sacrifice, so much so that it goes down the altar and fills up this entire trench. And then Elijah says, here's the deal. God, Yahweh, the one true God, will you consume this? And instantly, fire comes down from the sky, consumes the entire sacrifice, and evaporates all of the water that's in the trench instantly. Just consumes it. And the people obviously are shocked, and they're like, oh my goodness, we've sinned. We're going to follow after God, the one true God. We're not going to follow after Baal. And Elijah says, great, I want you to round up all those prophets. Don't let one escape. And they round them up, they take them down to the river, and they kill them. Like literally, they kill them. It's a big deal. And then Elijah says it's time for rain to come back. He calls for the rain. Clouds start to form, and he tells Ahab, hey, Ahab, you better rush back to your city before it gets too muddy and your chariot can't make it through. And so Ahab takes off on his chariot. And then Elijah takes off on foot and beats him to the city. He outruns a chariot being pulled by horses to the city. I mean, he's like, make Usain Bolt jealous, right? He's the fastest man alive. Now, look at his life. Look at what all he's done, what all he's been doing. How's Elijah doing right now? I would say all evidence points to him thriving. He's killing it. His ministry is literally on fire. Like, if you think about his Instagram feed, I mean, if there was Instagram back at the time, talk about a feed that make you jealous. I mean, you look at his life, you're thinking, dude's getting fed by ravens? I mean, what's going on? Oh, every day there's a miraculous amount of food. Oh, he raises a kid from the dead. He calls it to stop raining. It stops raining. He calls it to rain. It starts raining. He's faster than a chariot. Elijah's doing well. What happens next? Chapter 19, verse 1 says this. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so may the gods do to me and more so also if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. It's a fancy way for saying I'm going to kill you, right? You got to use big language as a queen. I'm going to kill you. Now, I would think to Elijah, that's no problem, right? He already raised the person from the dead. like they could catch him anyways. He is the fastest man alive. None of their chariots can touch him. Like, you think, no big deal. Let's see what happens. Verse 3. Then he, Elijah, was afraid. Doesn't that seem odd? When you look at what has just happened, is like, afraid of what? He wasn't afraid of 400 prophets of Baal. He wasn't afraid of Ahab. Now, why in the world all of a sudden is he afraid? And he arose and ran for his life. And he came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. So he went down to the southern kingdom of Judah. And then he left his servant there in Beersheba, but he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It's enough now, O Lord. Take away my life, for I'm no better than my fathers." What's going on? All external evidence showed that he was doing really well. All external evidence showed that he was doing really well. And then all of a sudden, he's ready to commit suicide. Like he's done with his life. He asked God to kill him. You see, what had been mounting, obviously, in Elijah's heart and mind was serious internal, emotional, and mental distress. I mean, if there was a psychologist back then, they probably would have diagnosed him with clinical levels of anxiety and depression. They would have put him on watch. But no one knew it. No one knew it. Elijah didn't even know it. But you look at what's going on, he's terrified. I mean, he ran for his life, literally. He's done. God, kill me. You can see the shame. He leaves his servant behind. He goes to be alone because what he's about to do, what he's about to say to God, he didn't want anyone else to see. He didn't want anyone else to hear. Ever felt like that? How you feel inside, what you think inside is so dark that you don't want anyone to know. It's so filled with shame because you feel weak. That's where Elijah's at. And he's filled with self-pity. He says, man, I'm no better than my fathers. And then later on, you see some more of his self-pity come out. Chapter 19, verse 10, he says to God, I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left. And they seek to take my life to take it away. I mean, can you hear it? He's like, I'm the only one left. I'm the only one who's faithful. I'm the only one who's doing your work. I'm the only one who's doing your will. I'm the only one that survived. God, I'm alone in this. What are you going to do? And you can begin to see what's going on in his heart, what's going on in his mind. You can see what was beneath the surface that no one could see because all evidence pointed to him thriving, right? His news feed looked great, right? The pictures he posted looked great. The articles he linked to looked great. The things that he said, the things that he did looked impressive. And yet he was dying inside. Severe burnout, right? He's physically exhausted. He's emotionally drained. He's spiritually empty. Severe burnout. He's done. He's ready to throw in the towel, but no one could tell, not even himself, until the death threat revealed what was really going on inside. Now, some of you, as you listen to this story, as you read this story, as you hear about Elijah's life, you think, yikes, that's me. That's me. When I think about all the stuff that I've been going through, when I think about what's happened in the last year and a half, maybe you've gone through some terrible loss. Maybe you've been more socially isolated than others. Maybe you've gotten sick, or maybe you've been terrified. Maybe you had other things going on in your life that were super stressful, and this added on top of it stress and fear and worry, and you're like, this is me. I feel like this. I feel empty. I feel exhausted. I feel done. I don't have the strength to go on. Some of you, that's That's you right now. Some of us in here, that's us, but we just don't know it. We're like Elijah, right? We've been coping well. We haven't been healing, we've been coping. We've been distracting, we've been numbing, right? We've been escaping. And it seems to be doing the trick. We haven't been really confronting what's going on. Everything externally seems good. But we're about to find out that things are not. And it's so important for all of us who are experiencing this, whether we know it or not, to hear what God has to say. Now, some of you, you're thriving. You're doing great. You weathered the storm well. Right? Maybe you had great community surrounding you. Maybe you pressed in spiritually. Maybe you really took care of yourself. Maybe you weren't affected financially throughout the last couple of years. Maybe you're doing all right. If that's you, you really need to listen to what God does, because we are called not just to be with Jesus, but also to partner with Jesus on his mission. We are called to care for the lonely, the hurting, the outcast, the marginalized, those people who are sick, those people who are exhausted, those people who are experiencing this. And we need to see the way that God does it, because it's very different from the way that we typically do things. Look at what happens. Here's what happens. Chapter 19, verse 5. It says that this is Elijah, after he says, God, just take my life. It says, and then he lay down and slept under a broom tree. And behold, an angel touched him and said to him, arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and he drank, and then he laid down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, arise and eat. The journey is too great for you. And he arose and he ate and he drank. And he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Oreb, the Mount of God. It's Mount Sinai. Now, does this strike any of you as odd? Elijah's had this thriving ministry, but it's revealed that internally he's struggling. He's empty, he's drained. And what God does is think about what God doesn't do. Because here are things that I would think God might have done. First of all, he doesn't kill Elijah. That's what he asked for. He asked God to kill him. He doesn't do that. He doesn't get mad and yell at Elijah. Are you kidding me, Elijah? Do you see what I've done for you? The ravens that I provided food for you, the miraculous way I provided food with the widow, the way that I worked through you with the drought, the way that I worked through you to bring the rain back, the way that I worked through you to raise the sun from the dead, the way that I worked through you with the prophets of Baal, the way that I worked through you to make you super fast and then a chariot. Seriously, Elijah? He didn't do that. He didn't yell at him. Didn't get mad at him. Didn't get angry at him. He didn't preach at him. He didn't minimize or trivialize his pain. He didn't ignore Elijah, and he didn't leave Elijah. He didn't tell him to go study his Bible. He didn't tell him to pray more. Didn't tell him about the starving children in Africa that have it worse than he does. He doesn't tell him about that he needs to go serve people more or just be around community. God did none of those things. Now, it's not that some of those things aren't true and they're not good, and that at some time you might do those things, but that's not what God does first. It's important to realize, what does God do first? The very first thing God does is he lets him sleep. That doesn't seem spiritual at all, does it? He lets him sleep. He lets him take a nap. And then the second thing God does is he feeds him and gives him stuff to drink, like for his physical body. And then God lets him sleep again. And then he feeds him and gives him water again. Because God knows that he created us, mind, body, and spirit, and it's all integrated. We're not just spiritual beings, and we're not just physical beings. We have emotions. We have it all, and they're all connected. They all relate to one another. And what's amazing is how much our physical body affects our mental attitude, affects our emotions that we experience, and affects the way that we encounter God. And so the very first thing that God does when Elijah is done is he takes care of his physical needs. Before he sends him on a spiritual journey, which he does, The first thing he does is takes care of his physical body. How cool is God? God doesn't say, come on, suck it up. You're fine. Get over it. Lets him sleep, gives him nutrients, lets him sleep, gives him nutrients, and then says, okay, now let's start to go on this journey. And we're going to look at where that journey takes him next week as we continue this series. But I just want to start here. What I love in the New Testament is Jesus reflects the heart of God so beautifully, this exact heart of God. Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 through 30. It's one of my favorite passages of Scripture. Jesus says this. He looks out and he says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you what? Rest. Doesn't that sound good? Come to me, all of you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Then he says, take my yoke upon you. This is a picture of two oxen together plowing a field. They're put together by this what they call a yoke. And Jesus is saying, yoke up with me. I'll carry the heavy portion, right? Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus says, let me take the heavy part. Let me take all of those things that are weighing you down, those things that you don't need to carry. I want to carry those for you. Can you feel those things that you're carrying? The weight of the world that's on your chest? The responsibilities that you have, the people that you're responsible for, the stuff that you have to get done, the things that you carry, the stress that you carry. Jesus says, let me carry that for you. It's not that you don't do those things, but you don't need to carry the weight. I want to carry that weight for you. What I give you is light and easy. I want you to have rest for your souls. Many of us in here need rest, and we just don't know it. Many of us, we don't feel permission to take a rest. We don't feel like that's okay. We got too much we got to get done. We got to make it happen. We got people relying on us. Many of us don't know how we'd find the margin. Our lives are just packed full. We don't have any space at all in our lives to rest. And many of us, even if we did, even if we felt okay to do it, and even if we were able to make some margin, we wouldn't even know how. Because what we've learned our entire lives is not how to rest. We've learned how to be lazy. And laziness and rest are not the same. Laziness is selfish. Rest is selfless. Many of you love to serve and care for others, but you don't like to take care of yourself. What we see here in Scripture is that taking care of yourself by really resting in Jesus, that's a selfless act because it gives you the strength to actually care for others better. See, what we've learned our entire lives is how to numb, how to escape, and how to distract. As soon as we get a headache, man, we got a pill for that, and the headache's gone. We don't have to worry about that. We don't think about that. As soon as we're hungry, we can get fast food. It's quick. It's easy. As soon as we feel any sort of emotional discomfort at all, we have this, right? Just quick, just really quick, right? We can get a like, we can post something, we can distract ourselves, we can watch something. As soon as we feel any sort of discomfort, right? We have this little Linus blanket in our hands. We can play a little game, and we don't have to feel that anymore. But we don't do the work of rest that leads to healing. We just push it off till later. And think about those times if you've ever, spent an hour or two scrolling. How do you feel afterwards? Man, my life is great. I feel so good. I feel rejuvenated and rested. No, you feel worse about yourself. When you binge watch a show, you don't go out of there going, oh, man, I'm ready to conquer the world. You're like, it's just worse. See, we numb and we escape and we distract, and it doesn't bring the healing that we need. It just pushes it off to a later date. And what we have to do is realize what God knows about us is we are an integrated person. and our physical health matters. So the first thing I want you to do, find some time this week, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is, get alone and just begin to pray. Just ask God, God, reveal what's going on inside. God, maybe I'm here where Elijah was, and I just don't know it. Show me what's going on. And then if you don't know how, if you don't feel permission, if you don't know what to do, just say, help me, show me. God, what are we going to do about this? Help me. I need help. God loves to help his children who cry out to him, even when they don't do it well. God, kill me, right? And he feeds him and lets him sleep. That's the heart of our God who loves you so much, who will never leave you and never forsake you. First, just take some time and evaluate with the Spirit of God what's going on in your heart and mind and how to proceed. Then remember, the most important thing for us in our world that is just crazy busy, because your life, I guarantee, is full, subtraction before addition. There are a lot of things that I love to talk about in following Jesus, being with Jesus, what I love to call the rhythms of intimacy, the spiritual disciplines. These are a lot of great things that you can do: silence, solitude, prayer, fasting, meditation, community service, like just all kinds of stuff that you can do to connect to God. But there's no way you can do any of those if your life is already full. You've got to look through your life and say, what can I get rid of? And for many of you, you're gonna have to really wrestle with the Spirit on this, because you're not ready to stop things. But what can you say no to so that you can say yes to what is better, to rest? Subtraction before addition. And then give yourself a break. Give yourself a break from this. We feel like we have to be connected to everybody all the time, and that everyone needs to be able to get a hold of me at any moment of time. I grew up in an era when there was a phone that did this. That's how you dialed. 417-233-334-6104. That was my phone number. And you just have to do this. And the thing about these phones that had the rotary dial is, if someone called you and you weren't home, one, they didn't get a hold of you. And two, you didn't even know it. And three, you know what? You were okay. We didn't die. We were okay. There weren't even answering machines. So if someone wasn't there to write a handwritten note to tell you someone called for you, you didn't know. And you were okay. See, we wrestled with a different thing back in the day called boredom. We don't know what that is anymore. But it was this brilliant thing where you could actually rest, use your imagination, come up with things for yourself to do. It's okay. I don't think we were created to allow everyone to get a hold of us 24/7. It's important to learn how to turn your phone off. What you do is there's a button on it. Whatever kind of phone you have a button, and you may have to just hold it down for a while. And you have to be careful, because if you keep holding it down, it'll call 911, so you make sure you don't do that. And then you just slide it to off. And then do you know what happens? You have anxiety because you're going through withdrawals. You're freaking out. What do? I don't know what to do. I'm standing here and I don't know what to do. What if someone needs to get a hold of me? Because you're so important, right? We are so important. People need to be able to get a hold of us. I'm basically the president of the United States, right? Everybody's relying on me. No, you're fine. Turn off. Give yourself a break from your phone, from media, from relationships, from responsibilities. Just give yourself a break. It's important to do that. And then begin to find healthy rhythms of work and rest. Work is good, but you have to find a healthy balance of relationships and rest, healthy balance of responsibilities and rest, healthy balance of the future and rest. It's good to plan for the future, but you've got to learn what are the rhythms that are healthy for me, so I don't continue in these patterns, and I can take time to do the hard work of rest and heal, to sleep, to eat food that actually has nutritional value in it. I love, when we go to McDonald's and then we pray, God, bless this food and nourishment of our bodies. And he's like, with what nutrients? How am I going to bless this to the nourishment of our body? There are no nutrients in there. Like eat food that has some nutritional value. We need that for our lives, our bodies to operate. Then you know what? Go take a walk, especially this week. I mean, we are blessed with some weather this week. Take a walk. Enjoy God's creation. Exercise is super helpful for your mental health. I want to end with these passages of Scripture. The first one comes from Genesis chapter 2. God has just finished creating the universe. So, not too much. Genesis chapter 2, verse 1. Thus, the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested. God rested. You can't read that and not be blown away. God, the all-powerful, limitless God of the universe, rested. God rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy because God rested. You're beginning to get a theme, right? Rested from all the work that he had done in creation. God gives us the ultimate example, the very beginning of the Bible, that rest is important. And then he gives us permission. He doesn't just give us permission, he commands us to rest. Exodus 20, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. For 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and everything that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. For that reason the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. God gives an example of rest, and then he commands us to rest. I tell you what, how many of us are breaking this commandment and we don't even feel bad about it? In fact, we probably feel good about it. Like we were super productive today, got some extra work done. God commands it. And then Jesus invites us into it. Same passage, Matthew 11, 28 through 30, but I want to read it through Eugene Peterson's eyes, the Message version. Are you tired? Worn out? Burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me. And you'll recover your life. How many of you need to recover your life? You've just been so busy. You've lost yourself in the midst of it. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Not laziness, but rest. Walk with me. Work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. One of my favorite phrases in all the world. The unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Many of you think, man, I can't afford to take a break. I can't afford to rest. I think Jesus would say you can't afford not to. You can't afford not to. People say, man, I'll rest when I'm dead. Well, you'll probably die sooner. It's the science behind it. We need to rest. If Simone Biles, one of the greatest athletes of all times, at the most important event of her life, can say no and rest, then you can rest. If Elijah, the prophet of God, can rest, then you can rest. And if God himself, the creator and the sustainer of the universe, who is limitless, can rest, then you can rest too. He shows you, he invites you, he gives you permission, and he commands you, take a rest. Your body matters. Your physical body matters. And if we don't start with that, then we can't continue on. This week, the way that you apply the message is take a nap.